Hi there, Erich Peterson here, Assistant Principal Horn of the Grand Rapids Symphony, and I'm joined by my good friend and colleague, Bob Ward, our bass trombonist, and we're very excited to be here today to kick off a series of videos about the brass section. In our video, we're going to cover the history of brass instruments, and also we're going to go into how we make sounds on our brass instruments. And then you'll see videos from some of our other colleagues in the brass section about each of the individual instruments. And then at the end, we're going to wrap it all up with a fun and exciting video that shows some everyday objects that are associated with brass instruments that I bet you never would associate with instruments. And I think you're going to really like that last one. Now, we're wearing our blue shirts here today. Blue shirts are for the brass family, as Mr. Ward showed you on his back there. And blue and brass both start with the letter B. So does best, because we think the brass family is the best family in the symphony orchestra. So to talk about the history, we're going to start with one of the very first brass instruments ever created. And Mr. Ward's got one to show you right there. And we've got a conch shell. You're probably saying, a conch shell? That's not a brass instrument. And it's not. But it's a relative of a brass instrument. And in order for you to know why it's a relative of a brass instrument, we've got to go over a couple of things first. Now, I'm sure by this time you've heard that all sounds in nature start as vibrations. In order to have a sound of any type, something has to vibrate or shake to make that sound. When I'm talking to you, air is going over my vocal cords. Those are vibrating. Eardrum is vibrating, and those vibrations convert into the sound that you associate with my voice. All of us in the orchestra need to make a vibration to make the sounds of our instruments happen. And in the woodwinds, you've seen that they blow across a reed, and that vibration is how they make their sound. The stringed instruments, they pull their bows across the string. That's how they make their vibration. The percussion family, they hit the head of a drum. That drum head vibrates, and that's how they make their vibrations. We make our vibrations in the brass family in a very special way. We do it ourselves by buzzing our lips together, and Mr. Ward's going to demonstrate that. Sounds kind of funny, but that's how we start. Now, we all have this very specialized piece of equipment right here that I'm going to show you. This is called the mouthpiece. We hold that up to our lips. It collects that buzz, focuses it a little bit, and directs it into our instrument. When I buzz into the mouthpiece, it sounds like this. Getting closer, still not there yet. We plug our mouthpiece into our instruments. Now, all of our brass instruments are just hollow tubes of metal. There's nothing inside here that's going to rattle or vibrate to make the sound. It's the vibration from our lips into the mouthpiece, going into our horn, and now that sounds like, and that's the sound you associate with our horn. Now, let's go back to the conch shell. Mr. Ward's going to show the end of his, and I'll show another one. You'll notice that mine is still pointed right there at the end, but on Mr. Ward's, we've flattened it off, and we've sanded it to it won't hurt his lips when he puts it up there. And that flat part is the mouthpiece area on that conch shell. Kind of looks like the end of our mouthpiece there. And that's where he's going to hold it up to his lips. And if we were to cut that conch shell open and you can see inside, you'd notice that it's a spiral. And you'll check out the spiral. It starts really small and it wraps around and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it flares out in the opening of the shell. Let's go back to our horn. We've got a tube that starts out really small and it wraps around in some way, shape, or form and gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it flares out here at the end of the instrument. This end of the instrument is called the bell because it looks like the bottom of a bell. And the bell of an instrument doesn't make any sound on its own, but it helps take sound that's there and make it louder and make it project. Like if I were to hold a megaphone up to my mouth while I'm talking, it would make my voice sound louder. That's what the bells on an instrument do. Now the bell on the conch shell is just that opening right there at the end. Now we're going to have Mr. Ward put that up to his lips and buzz through it and make a sound. And let's hear what that sounds like. Pretty cool. It makes a very loud sound. If we were in person, you'd hear that's a very loud sound. And you need to make a loud sound on a conch shell because if you lived thousands and thousands of years ago in a community by the sea and you needed to communicate with some people who weren't right there with you, you couldn't talk to them or travel over to them, you had to send a signal or a message that would travel a great distance. And across water, we know that sound travels even farther. And you could play notes onto your conch shell and send messages back and forth and send signals kind of like that. Mr. Ward, can we hear what one of those basic signals would have sounded like? Pretty cool. Now, you might notice that right now he's just able to play one note and one pitch on that conch shell, just plays one single type of note. And people got bored just being able to do one thing. And what happens when people get bored? They mess around. And if you start messing around with the conch shell, people started putting their hands in the end of the conch shell, in and out, making that hole at the edge of the conch shell bigger and smaller, and changing the notes that are played, kind of like we do with our hand in the bell of the French horn. Mr. Ward, I'm wondering if you could use your hand and maybe play us a little song. And since it's a conch shell, can you play us something that's maybe nautically or sea inspired? Yeah. Let's see what you got.
Okay.
Hey. Awesome. Good job. Probably the first time you've ever heard Baby Shark played on a conch shell. Now, we've got to go forward from conch shells to brass instruments, and the next thing we want to show you is this right here. If you've ever wondered why our instruments are called horns and are referred to as horns, is because before the metal brass was invented, we actually had to play on actual animals' horns. And what Mr. Ward has right there is a steer's horn. It's the horn from a male cow. And you'll notice that it starts small at one end and it flares out and it gets big at the other end. And to make this one a little bit easier to play, we've got a metal mouthpiece fashioned into the end of it. And let's hear what it sounds like when you fire that thing up, Mr. Ward. Pretty cool. Still a basic signaling device, not really a fine musical instrument yet, but that's where we're starting out. Now, check out what I've got right here. You'll notice that this curly horn is a ram's horn. It's also called a shofar, and starts small, gets bigger. And let's hear what this sounds like. Kind of fun. Now, we're going to move forward in time. The metal brass has now been invented, and we take that simple tube that's an animal horn. We're going to make it out of the metal brass. We're going to put a little twist in it, and we come up with this next thing here. Now, it looks like an ornament you might hang on your door at Christmas time, but this is actually a rudimentary musical instrument. This is called a hunting horn or a foxhorn, and it's also used as a signaling device. You'll notice a mouthpiece at one end, starts small, wraps around, gets bigger, flares out with the bell. Now, we've got a couple notes available to us on this horn. Let's hear what those notes sound like, Mr. Ward.
Okay.
Pretty cool. Now we're going to go forward in time. People are getting better and better with how they work with the metal brass. And we've got this example right here. Yeah. This is the predecessor to a modern day trumpet. This is called a bugle. And you'll notice still it's that same simple tube. And we've got a mouthpiece at one end, starts small, wraps around, gets bigger, flares out at the bell. And I'm sure that you've seen people play these maybe in the movies or the TV. And let's hear what something, maybe how about a fanfare, Mr. Ward, to wake people up in the morning. What might that sound like on the bugle?
Shoot, I'm going to try that again.
There it is. Fabulous. Nice job. So the last thing we've got for you, the last thing that was added to our instruments, so we've had simple tubes up until now, but we've got these fancy buttons or levers that we call valves. Now, if I were to pull this middle section out of my horn, the tube would wrap around twice, the air would go in here, and then just come right out. But I've got the option now to move my fingers and press down one of these valves, and now the air goes into this middle part of my horn through a different section of tubing, and then around and out. And you'll notice that I have different lengths of tubing. I can make my horn longer or shorter so I can play lower or higher notes. And I change the length of the horn that I'm playing by moving my valves. Now, as you watch the videos of the brass section, I want you to pay attention. See which of us use valves to change the length of their tubing. And I want you to be really observant and see if you can find an instrument or two that changes the length of their instrument in another way. We want to thank you for joining us here today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of our videos, and I also hope to see you at a Grand Rapids Symphony concert in the future. Until then, bye for now.
Bye.